There is something you need to understand, and you need to understand it right now. This moment, right here, right now, is not random. It's not coincidence. It's not just another video. It's not something you casually stumbled upon while scrolling without purpose. No, something deeper has happened. Something intentional. Something spiritual. Because out of all the moments in your day, out of all the distractions that could have taken your attention, out of all the voices calling for your focus, you ended up here. And that should make you pause. That should make you wonder. Because what if this isn't just content? What if this is a summoned? You felt something lately, haven't you? Something you couldn't explain. A strange shift in your energy, a heaviness that comes and goes, moments where your mind feels crowded but your spirit feels empty, like something is trying to get your attention, but you can't quite grasp it. You've tried to ignore it. You've tried to explain it away. You've told yourself it's just stress, just overthinking, just another phase. But deep down you knew that wasn't the full truth. Because there were moments, quiet moments, where everything inside you whispered, something is about to change. And that whisper brought both curiosity and fear. Because when something is about to change, it means something is about to end. Something is about to be revealed. Something you did see before, something you weren't ready to face before, something that has been hidden, not from your eyes, but from your awareness. And now you're being pulled toward it. Not pushed. Not forced. Pulled. That's how divine alignment works. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It draws you in gently, intentionally, precisely. And here you are. Which means one thing. You were meant to hear this. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Now. Because timing matters more than you think. There are moments in life where everything seems ordinary on the outside, but in the unseen realm, something is shifting. Lines are being drawn. Paths are being redirected. Decisions are being weighed, not just by you, but by forces you cannot see. And June 1st is one of those moments. But before you even get to the day, before the message fully unfolds, before the warning is revealed, you needed to be prepared. That's why this moment exists. That's why this message found you before anything else. Because if you walked into what's coming without awareness, you would misread it. You would react instead of discern. You would panic instead of position yourself. And that's exactly what this message is preventing. Now listen carefully, there's a reason this says, watch this alone. This is not just a suggestion. That's instruction. Because the moment you're in right now is personal. This isn't for a crowd. This isn't for group interpretation. This is between you and what heaven is trying to show you. Because the truth is, there are things about your life, your path, your situation that others wouldn't understand even if you tried to explain. And that's been frustrating, hasn't it? Feeling like you're carrying something no one else can see. Feeling like you're sensing things others dismiss. Feeling like you're walking through something alone. But what if you were never alone? What if this isolation wasn't rejection but preparation? Preparation for clarity. Preparation for revelation. Preparation for a moment like this, where everything starts to make sense. Because what you're about to hear is not general. It's not vague. It's not random words thrown into the air. It's targeted. And the fact that you're still here listening, leaning in, not clicking away, it says something. It says your spirit recognizes something your mind is still catching up to. It says there's a part of you that already knows. This is important. And you're right. Because in just a moment everything is going to start connecting. The feelings you couldn't explain. The situations that didn't make sense. The people whose energy suddenly shifted. The thoughts that came out of nowhere. Antennae and you couldn't shake. All of it is about to be brought into clarity. But before that happens, you need to make a decision. Not a big one. Not a complicated one. A simple one. To stay. To stay present. To stay open. To stay aware. Because what's coming next is not something you want to miss. Not this time. Not when everything is aligning like this. Not when the message is this specific. Not when the timing is this precise. So don't rush. Don't distract yourself. Don't let your mind wander. Because this isn't just something you're hearing, this is something you were called into. And the moment you fully accept that, everything begins to shift. Type I am ready in the comments if you feel this moment is not sluchahikakadian or stayeri. Blessing code 1717 is now surrounding you. There are dates and then there are appointed moments. You've lived through thousands of days in your life. Days that came and went without leaving a mark. Days that blended together, where nothing seemed to shift. Nothing seemed to change. Nothing seemed to matter beyond the routine. But every once in a while there comes a day that feels different before it even arrives. A day that carries a weight you can't explain. A day that feels like it's waiting for you, instead of the other way around. June 1st is not just a date on a calendar. It is a marker. It is a line. It is a spiritual checkpoint that was set long before you ever took your first breath. And something inside you already knows that. That's why when you heard it, when you saw it, when it crossed your awareness, something in your spirit paused. Not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly, deep, unmistakably. Because your soul recognizes timing even when your mind does not. You may be asking yourself, why this day? Why now? What makes June 1st different from every other day I've lived through? And the answer is not found in logic. It's not found in coincidence. It's found in alignment. Because there are moments in life where everything that has been building silently begins to surface all at once. Think about the past few weeks. Think about the patterns. The emotions that seemed heavier than usual. The thoughts that kept repeating themselves. The situations that didn't resolve the way you expected. The sense that something was unfinished, unresolved, lingering just beneath the surface. That wasn't random. That was preparation. Because when a significant moment approaches, life doesn't stay quiet. It begins to shift. It begins to stir. It begins to position you, even when you don't realize you're being positioned. June 1st is not arriving suddenly. It has been approaching you step by step, moment by moment, through everything you've been experiencing. And here's what you need to understand. Not every day carries consequence. But some days change your direction. June 1st is one of those days. It is a moment where something that has been hidden begins to reveal itself. Where something that has been delayed begins to move. Where something that has been unclear begins to make sense. But here's the part most people miss. Moments like this don't force themselves on you. They present themselves to you. And your awareness determines everything. You could walk into the day like any other day, distracted, unfocused, unaware, and completely miss what was meant for you. Or you can walk into it prepared, grounded, alert, able to see what others overlook, able to recognize what others dismiss, able to respond instead of react. Because what happens on June 1st is not just about what occurs around you, it's about what awakens within you. There is a shift tied to your perception, a realization, a moment where something clicks, not because it just started happening, but because you are finally seeing it clearly. And when that clarity arrives, it changes everything. It changes how you interpret people. It changes how you understand situations. It changes how you see yourself. And once that shift happens, there is no going back to who you were before. That's why this moment matters. That's why you were brought here before that day arrives. Because without preparation, clarity can feel overwhelming. Without awareness, truth can feel uncomfortable. Without grounding, revelation can feel like chaos. But with the right mindset, with the right focus, with the right spiritual posture, that same moment becomes power. It becomes direction. It becomes the exact turning point you didn't even know you were waiting for. And here's something even deeper. This day is not just about external events. It is about alignment between what has been happening around you and what has been shifting inside you. Because for a while now, you've been outgrowing something. A mindset. A pattern. A Ghanaian. A version of yourself that no longer fits who you are becoming. You felt it. A quiet discomfort. A subtle resistance. That inner knowing that something needs to change but not knowing exactly what or how. June 1st is where that internal shift meets external reality. It's where what you've been feeling begins to show itself in a way you cannot ignore. And when that moment arrives, you will have a choice. To dismiss it. To question it. You avoid it. Or to recognize it for what it is. A turning point that was set in motion long before you were ready to understand it. And now you're being given the advantage. The awareness. The preparation. So that when the day comes, you don't hesitate. You don't second guess. You don't miss it. Because you were already told, this is not just a day. This is a moment. And moments like this change everything. Type I see the timing in the comments if you feel the shift approaching. Blessing code 2020 is now aligning your path. There were recent moments where everything around you seemed quieter than usual. Not peaceful quiet. Not restful silence. But a kind of silence that felt heavy, almost uncomfortable, like something was missing, or something had paused without explanation. You noticed it, didn't you? Conversations that didn't go the way they normally do. People who suddenly felt distant without reason. Situations that used to move quickly now slowing down, delaying, hesitating. And in the middle of all that there was you. Trying to understand. Trying to make sense of why things felt different without anything clearly changing on the surface. You may have even asked yourself, why does everything feel off lately? And then came the deeper question, why do I feel like I'm waiting for something but I don't know what it is? That feeling was not SL Huchera Hikakien or Este Yuri. That silence was not empty. It was intentional. Because silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is preparation. You see, when life becomes loud, it distracts you. It pulls your focus outward. It fills your attention with noise, movement, reaction, and constant engagement. But when something important is about to happen, that noise begins to fade. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but gradually, strategically. Until you are left with space. Space to notice. Space to feel. Space to become aware of things you couldn't hear before. That's the kind of silence you've been experiencing. Not a void but a clearing. Because there were things in your life that needed to be slowed down so you could finally see them clearly. Patterns that were repeating but hidden beneath routine. Energy shifts in people around you that you ignored because everything felt normal. Thoughts that kept returning, trying to show you something but getting lost in distraction. So the noise was reduced. The pace was altered. The distractions were quietly removed. Not to isolate you but to prepare you. Because clarity does not come through chaos. Clarity comes through stillness. And in that stillness something very specific began to happen. You started noticing things differently. Small things. Subtle things. A change in someone's tone. A feeling you couldn't explain when you walked into a room. A thought that came to you out of nowhere but stayed longer than usual. That wasn't overthinking. That wasn't imagination. That was awareness beginning to wake up. Because when silence creates space, your perception sharpens. And once your perception sharpens, you begin to see what was always there but never recognized. This is why the silence felt uncomfortable. Because part of you was being pulled out of autopilot, pulled out of routine thinking, pulled out of familiar patterns, and placed into a position where you had to actually observe instead of just react. But here's where it becomes even more important: that silence you felt, it was not just external, it was internal. Because there were moments where even your own thoughts didn't feel as clear as before. Moments where you questioned yourself. Moments where you felt uncertain even about things you used to be sure of. That wasn't weakness. That wasn't confusion. That was transition. Because before clarity arrives, there is always a moment where the old way of thinking begins to dissolve, but the new understanding has not fully formed yet. And that space in between, it feels like silence, but it's not empty. It's forming something. It's aligning something. It's preparing you for realization that requires you to see differently than before. And this is where most people make a mistake. They rush to fill that silence. They distract themselves. They seek noise again because silence feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But you didn't do that. Or at least not completely. Because something in you kept coming back to this feeling. Something in you stayed connected to that quiet space even when it didn't make sense. And that is exactly why you are here right now. Because you didn't escape the silence. You listened to it. Even when you didn't fully understand it. Even when it didn't give you immediate answers. Even when it felt like nothing was happening. Something was happening. Something important. Something necessary. Because that silence was clearing the path for what comes next. It was removing distraction so you wouldn't miss the moment. It was sharpening your awareness so you could recognize what others overlook. It was preparing your mind, your perception, your focus for June 1st. And now you understand something you didn't before. You were not being ignored. You were not being left behind. You were not stuck. You were being positioned. Positioned to see clearly. Positioned to recognize truth. Positioned to step into a moment that requires awareness, not reaction. Because what's coming next will not be loud. It will not announce itself. It will not force your attention. It will appear quietly, subtly, almost easily missed, unless you are prepared. And now you are. Type "I understand" the silence in the comments if this resonates with you. Blessing code 3030 is now activating clarity within you. As this silence hath been preparing you, understand this. Every moment of clarity you receive is not just for you alone. There are others wandering in confusion, waiting for the same light that has reached you now. When you choose to support this message through Super Thanks or PayPal, you are not giving to a channel. You are planting a seed into someone else's awakening. The word declares, "Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy," and right now, your giving becomes a harvest of revelation in another soul's life. I feel led to say this directly to you. Step into this moment and become a vessel of light for someone else who is still in darkness. This is not just support. This is alignment with a divine assignment. What you release now will return to you multiplied, opening doors you did not even know were waiting. Do not hesitate. Act in obedience. There is something you need to face now, something that may challenge the way you've been interpreting everything around you. Because what you've been experiencing was never just surface level. It wasn't just mood shifts. It wasn't just people acting differently. It wasn't just life being unpredictable. There had been something deeper moving beneath all of it. Something subtle but intentional. A hidden layer of pressure that you couldn't fully explain but you could definitely feel. And the truth is you were not imagining it. There has been a battle happening around you. Not in the way most people think. Not loud. Not obvious. Not dramatic. But precise. Violent. Calculated. A battle that doesn't show itself directly but reveals itself through patterns. Through tension. Through sudden changes that don't seem to have a clear cause. Think about it. How many times recently have things felt slightly off without anything clearly being wrong? How many times did you walk into a situation and immediately feel something shift even if no one said anything? How many times did a conversation leave you questioning what was really meant even though the words sounded normal? That is where this hidden battle exists. Not in what is said openly but in what is felt underneath. Because not everything that affects you announces itself. Some things influence you quietly through energy, through intention, through presence. And when you are not aware of it, it can shape your reactions without you even realizing it. This is why certain moments recently felt heavier than they should have. Why small situations felt more draining than usual. Why interactions that used to feel neutral suddenly carried tension. It wasn't random. It was influence. A shift in the environment around you that you couldn't see directly but your awareness was beginning to pick up. And here's the part that matters most. This battle is not about chaos. It's about distraction. Because when your focus is pulled into confusion, you lose clarity. When your attention is scattered, you lose direction. When your energy is drained, you lose momentum. And that is exactly what has been happening. Not enough to completely stop you, but just enough to slow you down. To make you question yourself. To make you hesitate when you should move forward. To make you second-guess things you used to feel certain about. And all of this has been building quietly leading up to this moment. But now something is changing. Because awareness changes everything. The moment you begin to recognize that what you've been feeling is not adequately not random, not just in your head, you step out of reaction and into observation. And when you observe, you see patterns. You start connecting moments that didn't make sense before. You begin to realize that certain people bring a certain energy, that certain environments affect your clarity, that certain conversations leave you feeling different even when nothing obvious happened. And once you see that, you can no longer ignore it. Because now you understand something important. Not everything around you is aligned with where you are going. Not everything around you supports your direction. Not everything around you is neutral. Some things are simply misaligned. And that misalignment creates friction. Subtle friction, but enough to affect your focus, your energy, your decisions. This is why the battle has felt invisible. Because it wasn't trying to be seen. It was trying to remain unnoticed. Because what you don't recognize, you don't correct. What you don't question, you continue to engage with. And what you continue to engage with continues to influence you. But that cycle is breaking now. Because you are no longer unaware. You are no longer moving blindly through situations that don't feel right. You are no longer dismissing what your perception is trying to show you. And this is exactly where your power begins. Not in controlling everything around you, but in recognizing what is happening around you. Because once you recognize it, you choose differently. You respond differently. You protect your focus differently. You stop giving energy to things that quietly drain you. You stop engaging in situations that leave you unsettled. You stop ignoring what your awareness is clearly showing you. And that shift changes everything. Because the hidden battle only works when you are unaware of it. Once you see it, it loses its influence. Once you understand it, it no longer controls your reactions. Once you recognize it, you move with intention instead of confusion. And that is exactly what this moment is preparing you for. Because what's coming next requires clarity, requires awareness, requires you to see beyond what is obvious. And now you are beginning to. Type ISE clearly now in the comments if your awareness has shifted. Lesson code 4040 is now strengthening your discernment. Now everything you felt, everything you sensed, everything you couldn't fully explain begins to take form. Because this is the moment where the message shifts. This is the moment where silence turns into direction, where awareness turns into understanding, where what was hidden begins to speak. And this is where Archangel Michael steps forward. Not as a symbol, not as an idea, but as a presence of authority, of clarity, of precision. You may not see him with your eyes, but you can feel the weight of this moment changing. You can feel the tone shifting. Because this is no longer just reflection. This is instruction. And the first thing you need to understand is this: nothing that has been happening around you has been SL Hucheanik Akudi Nor Steyeri. Nothing you've experienced recently hath been without purpose. Every delay, every shift, every moment of discomfort, every situation that made you pause, it was all positioning you to hear this clearly. Because timing matters. And this message could not have reached you earlier because you would not have understood it the way you do now. But now you are ready. Now your awareness is open. Now your perception is sharp enough to receive what is being said without confusion, without resistance. And that is why this moment is happening. Archangel Michael does not speak to create fear. He speaks to create clarity. He speaks when something needs to be seen for what it truly is. He speaks when a moment requires precision, not hesitation. And right now you are in one of those moments. Here is something approaching. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that will be obvious to everyone around you. But in a way that will require you to be aware, to be steady, to be clear in your perception. Because what is coming is not meant to overwhelm you, it is meant to reveal something. Something that has been forming quietly just outside of your full awareness. And when it presents itself, it will look normal on the surface. It will not announce itself as important. It will not come with a warning attached. It will simply appear as another moment, another conversation, another situation. But it is not just another moment. And this is where most people miss it. Because they react based on appearance instead of recognizing significance. But you are not being placed in that position. You are being prepared to recognize it. To see it for what it is the moment it happens. And this is where Michael's message becomes direct. Stay steady. Stay observant. Do not rush your reactions. Do not let emotion lead your response. Because the situation that is approaching will test your perception, not your strength. It will test whether you see clearly or whether you fall back into old patterns of reacting without understanding. And this is important because you have grown. You are not where you used to be. Your awareness is not the same. Your perception is not the same. But moments like this reveal whether that growth is active or just potential. And that is why this message carries urgency but not panic. Because urgency is about awareness. Panic is about confusion. And you are not being called into confusion. You are being called into clarity. Archangel Michael's presence in this moment is not to intervene for you, it is to guide you so you can move correctly on your own. Because what you do next matters. How you interpret what happens next matters. How you respond in the moment matters. And this is where everything begins to align. Because now you understand something you didn't fully see before. You are not just experiencing life randomly. You are moving through moments that require awareness. Moments that reveal direction. Moments that show you exactly what is aligned and what is not. And this next moment is one of those defining points. It will be subtle. It will be easy to overlook. It will not demand your attention. But if you are present, if you are aware, if you are steady, you will recognize it immediately. And once you do, you will see clearly what needs to be done next, without confusion, without hesitation, without doubt, because clarity removes hesitation, and that clarity is exactly what you are being given right now. Type "I am alert" in the comments if you are ready to receive this message fully. Blessing code 5050 is now strengthening your awareness. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything becomes immediate. Up until this point, you've been prepared. You've been made aware. You've been guided into clarity. But this moment right here carries urgency. Not fear, not panic, but urgency. Because what has been building quietly around you is about to move. Not in weeks, not in some distant future, but within the next 24 hours. And this is why you were brought here now, not later. Because without this awareness, you would walk into that moment and treat it like any other. You would respond the way you always have. You would interpret it based on surface level understanding, and you would miss what it was actually showing you. But now you won't. Because now you know something is coming. And when you know something is coming, you move differently. You observe more. You react less. You pay attention to details you would normally overlook. And that is exactly what is required of you. Because the shift that is approaching is not loud. It is not obvious. It will not arrive with intensity or force. It will come quietly, in a moment that feels ordinary. A conversation, a message, an interaction, a situation that seems familiar, almost predictable. But it is not the same. There will be something different about it. Something subtle but clear if you are paying attention. A tone that doesn't match the words. An energy that feels slightly off. A detail that doesn't fully align. And in that moment you will feel it. That inner signal. That pause. That awareness saying, "Look closer." Do not ignore that. Because that is the moment. That is the shift. And this is where your response matters more than anything. Because you will have two options. The first is automatic. The reaction you've always had. The familiar response. The one that comes quickly without thinking. But that response belongs to who you were, not who you are now. The second option is intentional. It is slower. It requires awareness. It requires you to pause, to observe, to process before responding. And that response belongs to who you have become. This is the test. Not of your strength, not of your patience, but of your awareness. Because the situation itself is not the challenge. Your interpretation of it is. And that is why this warning matters. Because if you react without awareness, you will repeat a pattern. A pattern that has already played out before. A pattern that leads to the same outcome. The same confusion. The same frustration. The same sense of why did this happen again. But if you pause, if you observe, if you recognize the moment for what it is, you break that pattern. Immediately. Without force. Without conflict. Simply by choosing differently. And that is where the shift happens. Not outside of you. Within you. Because once you respond with awareness instead of reaction, everything changes. The direction changes. The outcome changes. The energy changes. And most importantly, you change. This is why the next 24 hours are important. Not because something overwhelming is coming, but because something revealing is. Something that will show you clearly what is aligned with you and what is not. What supports your direction and what quietly disrupts it. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to not knowing. You cannot continue engaging the same way, because clarity creates responsibility, and now you are responsible for what you recognize. But understand this, you are not being set up to fail. You are being prepared to succeed, because you were given this awareness before the moment arrived. You were given the ability to see it before it fully unfolds, and that changes everything. Because now you are not walking into the next 24 hours blindly. You are walking into it ready to notice, ready to understand, ready to respond in a way that aligns with who you are now, not who you used to be. And that is where your power is, not in controlling the situation, but in controlling your response to it. Because your response is what determines what happens next. Type "I will respond with awareness" in the comments if you are ready for this shift. Blessing code 6060 is now guiding your next 24 hours. Now this is where things become even more clear. Because what is about to be revealed to you is not just about situations. It's about people. The ones around you. The ones you interact with. The ones you trust, or at least the ones you've grown familiar with. And this is where you need to stay grounded, because this part requires honesty. Not fear, not suspicion, but clarity. Because not everyone around you is aligned with where you are going. That doesn't make them bad, and doesn't make them enemies. But it does mean something important. They are not meant to walk with you into what comes next. And this is something you've already started to feel, even if you haven't fully accepted it. There have been moments where someone's presence felt different. Not raw, not aggressive, just of. Moments where conversations didn't flow the way they used to. Moments where something felt forced or distant or slightly disconnected, and you couldn't explain why. So you dismissed it. You told yourself it was nothing. You told yourself you were overthinking. You told yourself everything was fine. But the feeling didn't go away. Because it wasn't SL Hucheadikakien or Yuri. It was awareness. Because when you begin to grow, when your perception sharpens, when your direction becomes clearer, you start noticing misalignment. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, in energy, in intention, and the way people respond to you or don't respond at all. And here's the truth you need to accept. Not everyone who has been in your life is meant to stay in your next chapter. Some people were part of your past alignment, not your future direction. And that is why things feel different now. Because you are not the same. Your thinking has changed. Your awareness has changed. Your priorities have shifted. And when that happens, it naturally creates distance. Not because something went wrong, but because something is no longer aligned. This is what most people misunderstand. They think distance means conflict. They think change means something broke. They think silence means something is wrong. But sometimes distance is clarity. Sometimes change is direction. Sometimes silence is understanding. Because you are no longer forcing connections that don't feel right. You are no longer ignoring what your awareness is showing you. You are no longer trying to make everything stay the same when you are clearly not the same. And this is where your next decision becomes important. Because now that you see it, you have a choice. To ignore it again. To force familiarity. To continue engaging the same way just to avoid discomfort. Or to accept it. To recognize that not everything is meant to continue. To allow space where space naturally forms. Without guilt. Without over-explaining. Without trying to fix something that is not broken, just completed. Because not all endings are losses. Some are transitions. Some are necessary shifts that make room for what actually aligns with you. And this is where most people struggle. because they confuse attachment with alignment. They stay connected out of habit, not clarity. They maintain relationships out of comfort, not direction. But you are not being called to stay comfortable. You are being called to stay aligned. And alignment requires honesty. Honesty about what feels right. Honesty about what no longer does. Honesty about what supports your direction and what quietly disrupts it. And this is not about cutting people off suddenly. It's not about confrontation. It's not about creating distance forcefully. It's about awareness. Because once you are aware, your actions adjust naturally. Your energy shifts naturally. Your engagement changes naturally. You don't have to force anything. You simply stop investing in what doesn't align and start protecting what does. Because your focus matters. Your energy matters. Your direction matters. And not everyone is meant to have access to that. Not because you are better, but because you are moving differently now. And that difference requires space, requires clarity, requires you to trust what you are feeling without needing validation from others. Because the moment you start ignoring that awareness again, you lose the clarity you just gained. But the moment you trust it, everything becomes simpler. You stop questioning yourself. You stop overanalyzing. You stop forcing things that don't feel right. And you move forward with clarity, with direction, with alignment. And that is exactly where you are being guided right now. Type "I choose alignment" in the comments if you are ready to move forward clearly. Blessing code 7070 is now protecting your energy. Here is a reason why everything feels like it's been building to this point. A reason why certain patterns in your life have repeated themselves even when you tried to change them. A reason why you found yourself in similar situations with different people but the same underlying outcome. And deep down you've noticed it. That quiet realization that something keeps looping. Something keeps returning. Something keeps trying to pull you back into a version of life you've already outgrown. That is not coincidence. That is a cycle. And cycles don't break on their own. I continue until someone becomes aware enough to stop them. That someone is you. Not by SLUCHAKIN or STYURI. Not by luck. But by design. Because not everyone recognizes pattern. Not everyone questions repetition. Not everyone pauses long enough to see that what keeps happening is not random but structured. What you did, even if you didn't fully understand it at first, you felt it. That sense of why does this keep happening? That moment where you realized I've been here before. That awareness with a beginning. Because cycles lose their power the moment they are recognized. But recognition alone is not enough. There comes a point where you have to respond differently. Where you have to make a choice that breaks the pattern instead of continuing it. And that moment is now. Because everything you've been guided through so far, the silence, the awareness, the hidden influences, the shift in people around you, all of it had been leading to this one realization. You cannot move forward while repeating what belongs to your past. Something has to end. Not forcefully, not grammatically, but intentionally. Because cycles are not always obvious. They don't always show up as major events. Sometimes they appear as small decisions, repeated habits, familiar reactions. The same type of conversation handled the same way. The same emotional response triggered by a slightly different situation. And every time you respond the same way, the cycle continues. But the moment you pause, the moment you choose differently, the cycle breaks. Immediately. Because cycles rely on repetition. They survive on predictability. They continue because your response stays the same. But your awareness has changed now. which means your response can change. And that is where everything shifts. Because you are no longer reacting automatically. You are choosing intentionally. You are seeing patterns as they happen, not after the fact. You are recognizing moments that used to pass unnoticed, and that gives you something powerful, control. Not over everything around you, but over how you engage with it. And that is enough to break any cycle. Because the cycle is not outside of you. It is in the interaction. The repeated response. A familiar reaction. And now you are stepping out of that. This is why this moment is so important. Because what happens next will give you an opportunity. An opportunity to either continue the pattern or end it. And the difference will come down to one thing. Awareness. Because the moment will feel familiar. It will look like something you've already experienced. It will carry the same tone, the same energy, the same setup. But this time you will see it clearly. And when you see it clearly, you will know exactly what needs to be done. Not because someone told you. Not because you force yourself. But because it will be obvious that this is the moment where it ends. And when you choose differently, when you respond with awareness instead of habit, when you step back instead of stepping into the same pattern, everything changes. The cycle stops. The repetition ends. And something new begins. Not immediately in the outside world, but immediately within you. And that internal shift will start affecting everything else. Because once you stop participating in the old pattern, it no longer has a place in your life. It cannot continue without your involvement. And that is why you were chosen for this moment. Because you were able to see what others overlook. You were able to feel what others ignore. You were able to pause instead of continuing blindly. And that awareness is what breaks generations of repetition. Not just for you, but for everything connected to you moving forward. This is not a small shift. This is a defining one. Because once a cycle is broken, it stays broken. And what replaces it is entirely up to you. Type "the cycle ends with me" in the comments if you are ready to break it. Blessing code 8080 is now sealing your transformation. As you step into this moment of breaking cycles, understand this. Every chain that falls from your life becomes a doorway for someone else still bound in darkness. When you release your support through Super Thanks or the PayPal link in the description, you are sowing a seed into freedom, not just yours, but into the lives of those still searching for this truth. The word declares, what you lose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, and your giving becomes a prophetic act that unlocks light in hidden places. I am speaking directly to you now. Do not hold back in this moment of alignment. What you release becomes a river that carries this message to souls who are waiting in silence. This is not charity. This is obedience in motion. Step forward now and activate what heaven is ready to multiply back into your life. Now everything you've been guided through leads to this moment. Not the moment outside of you, but the moment within you. Because awareness alone is not the final step. Recognition is not the final step. Even clarity is not the final step. There is one more thing required. A decision. And not just any decision, a defining one. Because there are moments in life where you can observe, reflect, and wait. And then there are moments like this where waiting is no longer neutral. Where hesitation becomes a choice. Where delay begins to shape your direction just as much as action does. And this is one of those moments. Because now you see. You see the patterns. You see the misalignment. You see the cycles. You see the subtle shifts in people, in situations, in energy. You see what is no longer SL Hucheaikekuien or Este Yuri. And once you see it, you cannot return to not seeing it. But here's where most people get stuck. They recognize everything, but they don't act on it. They understand what needs to change, but they delay it. They feel what is right, but they hesitate to follow it. And that hesitation keeps them exactly where they are. Because delay is not harmless. Delay is not passive. Delay is a decision. A decision to stay in the same pattern just a little longer. A decision to keep engaging with what you already know is not aligned. A decision to wait for the perfect moment even when the moment is already here. And that is where everything either shifts or stays the same. Because the difference between transformation and repetition is not knowledge. It is action. It is obedience to what you already understand. And obedience is not complicated. It is simple, but not always easy. Because obedience requires you to trust what you feel without needing external confirmation. It requires you to move forward even when it feels unfamiliar. It requires you to choose alignment even when comfort tries to pull you back. And this is where your decision matters. Because right now you are standing at a point where you can either move with what you know or stay with what you've already outgrown. You can either act on your awareness or continue questioning it until the moment passes. And understand this clearly. Moments like this do not stay open forever. They pass. Not because they disappear completely, but because the opportunity to act within them shifts. And when that happens, the same pattern repeats. The same cycle returns. The same realization comes back later with the same question. Why didn't I act when I knew? But this time you are not going to ask that question. Because this time you are aware before the moment fully unfolds. You are prepared before the decision is required. You are clear before action becomes necessary. And that changes everything. Because now you are not reacting after the fact. You are choosing in the moment. And that is where transformation happens. Not later. Not eventually. Now. In the decision you make when everything becomes clear. And that decision does not need to be loud. It does not need to be dramatic. It does not need to involve confrontation or explanation. It can be simple. A shift in how you respond. A choice to not engage the same way. A quiet step in a different direction. Because real change is not always visible to others. But it is always clear to you. And that clarity is what you are being called to trust. Because everything you've felt, everything you've noticed, everything you've realized has led you to this point. Not to question it again, but to act on it. Without delay. Without hesitation. Without returning to what you already know does not align. And once you do that, once you move with that clarity, something powerful happens. The path ahead becomes clear. The confusion fades. The uncertainty disappears. Not because everything changes instantly, but because you have changed your position within it. You are no longer stuck between knowing and doing. You are aligned. And alignment creates momentum. Momentum creates movement. And movement changes everything. Type I choose action in the comments if you are ready to move without delay. Blessing code 9090 is now activating your next step. Now after everything you've seen, everything you've understood, everything you've been made aware of, there is something you need to anchor yourself in. Because awareness without reassurance can feel heavy. Clarity without grounding can feel overwhelming. And this is where many people begin to feel uncertain, not because they lack understanding, but because they feel like they are facing everything alone. But you are not alone. And this is not something you need to convince yourself of. It is something you need to recognize. Because through every moment you've experienced, every shift, every realization, every uncomfortable truth that came to the surface, you were not unguarded. You were not exposed. You were being guided, even when it didn't feel like it, even when things seemed unclear, even when situations didn't resolve the way you expected. There was a structure to it, a positioning, a level of protection that did not remove every challenge but prevented you from stepping into the wrong direction completely. Think about it. There were moments where things didn't work out, and at the time, it felt frustrating. Moments where something you expected to happen didn't happen. Conversations that didn't go the way you thought they would. Opportunities that seemed right but didn't fully open. At the time it felt like delay, like confusion, like things were not aligning. But now, looking at everything from where you stand, you can see something different. Those moments were not setbacks. They were redirections. Subtle corrections that kept you from moving deeper into something that was not aligned. And that is protection. Not the kind that removes every obstacle, but the kind that keeps you from going too far in the wrong direction. Because true protection does not always feel comfortable. Sometimes it feels like resistance. Sometimes it feels like things not working out. Sometimes it feels like being pulled back when you were ready to move forward. But that pull, that pause, that redirection is what kept you aligned with where you are now. And where you are now is exactly where you need to be to receive this clarity, this awareness, this understanding, and this next step. Because protection is not just about where you have been, it is about where you are going. And right now you are not moving forward without guidance. You are not stepping into the next moment without awareness. You are not making decisions without clarity. Which means you are not unprotected. There is a structure around you, a level of awareness that has been activated within you, a sense of perception that is now sharper than before, and that alone is protection. Because when you see clearly, you avoid what once confused you. When you understand patterns, you don't repeat them. When you recognize misalignment, you don't engage with it the same way. And that changes your entire path. Because now you are not relying on luck. You are not relying on chance. You are moving with awareness. And awareness is what keeps you aligned. This is why you don't need to fear what is coming next. You don't need to feel uncertain about the shift that is approaching. You don't need to question whether you are ready. Because you are not stepping into it blindly. You are stepping into it prepared. Prepared to observe. Prepared to respond with clarity. Prepared to recognize what matters and what doesn't. And the preparation is not is intentional. Because everything you have been guided through was meant to bring you to this exact level of understanding. So that when the moment arrives, you don't feel lost. You don't feel overwhelmed. You don't feel unsure. You feel steady. You feel grounded. You feel clear. And that clarity is what allows you to move forward without hesitation. Because you are no longer questioning everything around you. You are trusting what you see, what you feel, what you understand. And that trust is what keeps you aligned with your path. So whatever happens next, whatever presents itself, whatever shift unfolds in front of you, remember this. You are not navigating it alone. You are not figuring it out without guidance. You are not moving without direction. You are supported by the very awareness that has been given to you. And that awareness will guide you exactly where you need to go. Type "I am protected" in the comments if you trust this guidance. Blessing code 1010 is now surrounding your path. Now this is where everything becomes real. Not in theory. Not in understanding. But in action. Because everything you have received up until this point, every realization, every shift in awareness, every moment of clarity has been leading to this exact place. A place where knowing is no longer enough. A place where awareness must become movement. Because there is a difference between seeing clearly and stepping forward clearly. And right now you are being called to step. Not later. Not when it feels easier. not when everything around you becomes perfectly aligned. Now, in this moment, because activation does not wait for perfection, it begins in decision. And what you do right now, even in the smallest way, sets everything else in motion. So listen carefully. This is not about making a dramatic move. It is not about changing everything at once. It is not about forcing yourself into something unfamiliar. It is about something much more precise, much more intelligent. It is about alignment in action. Because you already know what needs to shift. You already feel what no longer aligns. You already recognize the patterns that need to end. You already understand where your energy has been misplaced. And now you are being asked to respond to that awareness. Not by overthinking it. Not by analyzing every possible outcome. But by acting on what is already clear. Because hesitation is no longer protection. Hesitation is delay. And delay keeps you connected to what you have already outgrown. So what does this activation look like? It looks like choosing differently immediately. It looks like adjusting your response in the next situation you face. It looks like not engaging in the same conversation the same way. It looks like stepping back where you used to step in. It looks like moving forward where you used to hesitate. It looks like trusting your awareness without needing reassurance. Because this is where your power is. Not in knowing everything, but in acting on what you already know. And understand this activation does not require approval. It does not require explanation. It does not require anyone else to agree with you. Because this is not about them. This is about you aligning with what you have already seen clearly. And when you do that, something shifts immediately. Not necessarily outside of you at first, but within you. Your energy changes. Your focus sharpens. Your direction becomes stronger. Because you are no longer divided between knowing and doing. You are aligned. And alignment creates momentum. Momentum that begins to affect everything else. Because once you start moving with clarity, situations respond differently. People respond differently. Your environment begins to reflect the shift you have made internally. Not because you forced it, but because you changed your position within it. This is why this moment matters so much. Because activation is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose. And once you choose it, everything else begins to adjust around that decision. But here is what you must remember. Do not go back. Do not return to the same responses. Do not fall into the comfort of what is familiar but no longer aligned. Because the moment you go back, you slow down the momentum you just created. And right now, momentum is everything. Because you are not just stepping forward, you are stepping into a new level of awareness. A new way of moving. A new way of responding to everything around you. And that requires consistency. Not perfection, but consistency. Because the more you act in alignment, the more natural it becomes. The more clear everything feels. The less confusion remains. And soon what once required effort becomes automatic. But it starts here. With this decision. With this moment. With this choice to move differently now. Because everything that comes next depends on what you do with what you know. And now you know. Type I am activated in the comments if you are ready to move forward. Blessing code 1111 is now empowering your actions. Now you have reached the end of this message. But this is not an ending. This is a threshold. A crossing point between who you were and who you are becoming. Because everything you have just heard, everything you have just felt, everything that has shifted within you during this moment was not meant to stay as words. It was meant to become direction. Because from this point forward, things will not feel the same. Not because the world around you has suddenly changed overnight, but because you have. Your awareness has sharpened. Your perception has shifted. Your understanding has deepened. And once that happens, you cannot return to the version of yourself that moved without seeing. You cannot go back to reacting without understanding. You cannot ignore what is now clear, because clarity changes your position permanently. And this is what happens next. You will begin to notice things immediately. Small things at first. Subtle shifts. Moments that stand out in ways they didn't before. Conversations that reveal more than just words. Situations that show you exactly what they are without confusion. And you will recognize them instantly. Because you are no longer looking at the surface. You are seeing the structure beneath it. You are understanding the pattern as it happens. And that awareness will guide every step you take from here. But there is something else you need to be ready for. Because when you change, not everything around you adjusts immediately. Some things will remain the same for a moment. Some people will continue as they always have. Some situations will appear unchanged on the surface. But you will see them differently. And that difference will create a natural separation. Not forced, not dramatic, but undeniable. Because once you see clearly, you cannot pretend not to. Once you recognize misalignment, you cannot fully engage with it the same way. Once you understand a pattern, you cannot participate in it unconsciously. And that is where your new path begins. Not by changing everything at once, but by moving differently within everything. By choosing alignment consistently. By responding with awareness every time. By trusting what you see without second-guessing it. And as you do that, something powerful begins to happen. The right things begin to align. The right situations begin to open. The right connections begin to form. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped engaging with what was not meant for you. And that creates space. Space for what actually belongs in your path. This is the shift. Not something dramatic, but something precise. Something intentional. Something that builds momentum with every aligned decision you make. And soon you will look back at this moment and realize this is where it started. Not when everything changed around you, but when everything changed within you. Because this was the moment you stopped delaying. The moment you stopped questioning what was already clear. The moment you chose to move forward without hesitation. And that decision will carry you further than you realize right now. So, as you leave this moment, do not disconnect from what you have just received. Do not let distraction pull you away from this clarity. Do not return to old patterns out of familiarity. Stay aware. Stay grounded. Stay aligned. Because what happens next is built on what you do from here. And now you are ready. Type "I step into my NEW path" in the comments if you are moving forward with clarity. Blessing code 1212 is now sealing your transformation. As you step into this new path, understand this truth. Every moment of clarity you receive is a light meant to reach beyond you. There are souls still waiting in confusion, still searching for the very message that found you today. When you give through super thanks or the PayPal link in the description, you are not supporting a video. You are releasing a seed into someone else's breakthrough. The word declares, "Cast your bread upon the waters, and it will return to you." And your giving becomes a living stream carrying truth to those still in darkness. I speak directly to you now. This is your moment to act, not out of obligation, but out of alignment with a greater purpose. What you release today will return multiplied, opening doors that only obedience can unlock. Step forward now and become part of this mission.